But anyway, we were just all dissolved into great laughter.
You mean, you want me to talk about the old Sunday school that actually burnt down?
Well, can I just share one more story?
Hi, I'm Marion, and this is my husband, Robert, or Bob.
Oh, you are? No. Okay. Well, we're Noel and Elizabeth Harvey.
Hello, church. My name's Ron Muir.
I'm Ryan,
I'm Susie.
and we're members of Kyneton Baptist Church.
Hi, I'm Katie, and welcome to our living room session today. It's really wonderful to have you with us, wherever you are and whatever time you're watching this. It's great to be together. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been celebrating the fact that KBC is 160 years old. And we've been sharing stories and hearing about the life of KBC over the last years from Tim and from Joy, and it's been so great to hear from them. Have you ever wondered what life might look like in another 160 years? It sort of plays with my brain a bit to think about what that might look like. And it's really interesting to think that even though life changes so much and so many things happen, that in the Bible we can read that through all of those things, that God remains the same, that God never changes. And this morning I just want to share with you a few of the verses that link to that. So let's look at some Bible verses now that really show us just how consistent God is throughout all of the changes that happen in the past and the changes that lay ahead. In John chapter 1, verse 1, we read, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." In Psalm 90, verse 2, "Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God." In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8, it says, "Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever." In Malachi chapter 3, verse 6, we read, "I, the Lord, do not change. So you, the descendants of Jacob, are not destroyed." Revelation chapter 1, verse 8, "I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord God, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty." So it's really wonderful as we read these verses, just the reassurance that we can get that no matter what we're going through, no matter what changes take place, that God is always there. So kids, this is the same for you. Changes in your life happen every single day. And it's just really interesting to think that, no matter what happens in life, that God is always there and God always loves you. 160 years, that is such a huge number to think about. It is nearly 8,343 weeks, and it is just over 58,000 days. That is incredible to think about. So in 1860, there were no cars, there were no mobile phones, no computer, and absolutely no internet. Life in 1860 looked completely different to what it looks now. If people in 1860 had heard that on the 160th birthday of KBC, a whole heap of people will get together on a computer and each of them will be in their own place and all talking together on this thing we call a computer, they would have thought that was crazy and they would have thought it was really weird. It would have been something that would have totally blown their minds. Life has completely changed since 1860. So what about in another 160 years? I can only imagine and guess and come up with a whole bunch of crazy ideas of what life might look like in another 160 years. But what is certain is that it will look totally different to what it looks now. There will be changes that we can't even imagine now. That would be something that we would have to just think way beyond what we think about today. I have changed just even in my life. I look quite different to what I used to look like. The things that we have today, computers, phones, the latest iPhone, whatever number that is, I don't even have one, so I don't know. Are we up to 11? The things that we have today will seem old. Whatever phone you've got, whatever computer you use that's brand new will be ancient. And your kids will laugh at you for the things that you've used today. Things will be totally different. But one thing is absolutely certain, that God will always be there, that God will always love you. In one of the verses that we read today in Hebrews 13, verse 8, that said that Jesus will be the same yesterday, today, and forever. You will always be loved by Jesus, and that will never change. God created us to grow and to change, and that is part of life. So I just really want to challenge you today to get to know God a bit more, to read the Bible, to talk to Him, to get out in nature. I know you hear me say that a lot, but I just think it's such a great way to get to know God even more. And especially in times of great change, when you're not sure what's coming next, God will be the best person to have with you. So kids, this is true for you, and it's just as true for us as adults, that change will happen. But change happens in the best way when we go through it with God. So for me, I find change quite difficult. It can make me quite worried and quite stressed out sometimes. And I find that that's the best time when I sit. I might put some music on, I might sit and read the Bible, I might just take some time out just to listen to God and what He's saying in that moment. And I find that that is the time when things become clear and I really get a sense of the direction that He wants me to take. So just having that time out to sit and to hear from God. And I would encourage you today that once you've heard these stories, once you've heard about changes that have happened and it might prompt something in your own mind, just to take that time, whether it's today or sometime during the week, that you would sit and you would talk to God, put on some music and just really wait for what He has in store for you. So at the moment, I'm back to what's happening with work, what's happening with next year. And that's still not clear. And that's a change that I know is coming. And when I sit and I hear from God, I'm filled with His peace, that I'm just assured that He has got the plan, that I just need to listen to Him and follow Him, and that He will lead me in the way that He wants me to go. I find that when I'm not listening to God and I'm trying to work things out for myself, I just end up in this great big jumbled mess of just emotions that I don't know what to do with. And sitting with God, it just really gives me a sense of His peace and His direction, and just this assurance of knowing that He has the best plan for me. When we go through change and change happens, and we look back, and usually I can see how God has joined different challenges together to bring me to the place where He wants me to be. And I know that that's the best place when I've done it with God. Today we're going to hear some more stories about the history of KBC and changes that have happened. And I would just encourage you to be reflecting and considering what that means for you and your life. Maybe you might be thinking about changes that you're facing and what part God plays in that and where God fits into that. Have you got Him in the number one place in amongst that?
Well, I think like the Baptist Church has changed unbelievable over the 70 years that I've been hanging around.
Well, of course, the church back in those days was where Scott's funeral parlour is now located. That was the building that we went into. A very small building. a very traditional Baptist church building with a mural on the back, and painted by Mrs. George, and with traditional pews and the organ and the stage, very traditional with the old hall out the back. That was the physical setting for Kyneton Baptist Church in those days.
We were looking for a new church home, so we decided to come to Kyneton Baptist. We were a little bit fragile and perhaps nervous, and we went to the front door, and it was opened by this very tall man with a lovely smile, and he was just so friendly. It almost felt like a homecoming.
Oh yes, I found it quite enjoyable. The people very welcoming and kind.
I'm 71. I've lived in Kyneton all my life. When I was about 2 weeks old, my mum took me to church. Like all of my brothers and sisters, Mum took us to church as little babies. And then I had a grandmother that was very heavily involved with the Baptist church.
We actually arrived in Kyneton Australia Day 1976, so we've been here for well over 40 years.
We moved from the city, and for my part it was my first country experience. But we came with the intention of coming to Kyneton Baptist because we had good friends there. And we found Kyneton Baptist, as other churches in the town too, to be very welcoming of people and very involved in the community.
We've been a part of Kyneton Baptist Church since 2006, when we actually moved up to Kyneton from Melbourne to step into the role as pastor and pastor's wife at Kyneton Baptist Church back then. And we've had that fortunate journey of being able to stay on in the church after finishing up as in that role.
For the kids and our family, the church has just been a beautiful constant in our lives for the whole time we've been here, which is, 15 plus years. It's when we did finish leading the church and needed to make decisions about where to live, no one in my family actually wanted to leave the church. We just needed to finish leading the church but not leave it. So that is one testament to the interconnectedness that the people we all had.
Yeah, the church is so much different today. Back when Marlene and I first went to church, and all the years that we went to the Kyneton Baptist, you knew everybody in the church, and you mixed with everybody, and you talked to everybody every week. There's a lot of people in the church today that I go, oh, I've never seen you before. I start talking to them. They said, oh, well, I've been coming here for 2 years or something. I go, oh, okay. But yeah, back in the 80s and 90s, you just knew everybody personally, and church picnics and church get-togethers at Christmas and things like that was just, everybody took part in it, and we just had a great time. Especially when growing up, we used to go to Castlemaine every year for a church picnic, and we go up there and to the big oval where the swimming pool is, and we'd all go swimming, and we'd be down on the oval, and you'd got raspberry cordial and all sorts of things, and they were great memories.
No, I think it's good to recognise the seasons that God does take us through. And I think with seasons comes different people into the life of the church, and then sometimes people leave. And I think our church has been really open-hearted and open-armed at welcoming people. And sometimes those people haven't stayed too long, but they leave their mark, and God uses them for that time. And people have enduring friendships with people who've only been with us perhaps for a short time. But I think there's a beautiful welcoming acceptance of all sorts of people, and I think that's made our church family so rich. We do have a very diverse church, and that diversity God brings. That's what I love about us.
Right from when we came up here, we had the group of people who'd been faithful for a number of years, who had been probably born in the area and grown up in the area. There were people like us who moved up here for various reasons, so we were very diverse in age range and our skill sets and where we came from. So Kyneton Baptist has always been very good at accommodating different people.
I think one of the interesting things, we actually came to Kyneton, I guess, in that first wave of tree changes. You know, we were called hippies back in those days, but that's I think was when the movement started. I think that's when Kyneton as a community really started to change. It was in the late 70s when there was dramatic growth starting to happen. The highway was being upgraded and those sorts of things. So yeah, we saw a lot of people moving in. And I think, as Elizabeth said, I think the acceptance of diversity has been a real strength of Kyneton Baptist Church in our entire time here. We were very different. When we arrived here, we were not your traditional conservative Baptist, and probably never have been. But I think, Elizabeth had long hair, I had long hair. We were traditional, we were hippies back in those days, but we were accepted. And I think despite it, of course some people weren't terribly comfortable, but I think we were accepted, and I think the church has been always really accepting of that difference. I think there's a real challenge for the church though now. Whilst we have been very accepting of others, I think the diversity of our community has even become greater. And so the challenge of acceptance and understanding and inclusion within the Baptist church is going to be a real challenge for the next 100 years. But it was, above all, it was very much a family church and place where you could bring your kids and kids were accepted. And it's always been that way. We haven't always had a lot of children within the church, but certainly they've been very, very welcome and always has been the case.
You want me to talk about the old Sunday school that actually burnt down? That I got the blame for. Yeah, well, when we sold the Kyneton Baptist Church to TJ Scott and Sons, the funeral directors, we bought the Methodist Church, which is our church today. We got stuck into it and we put all took a lot of the bluestone out and put doorways in and put an extension on, and I did quite a bit of work on that. But there was an old Sunday school hall up the back, up where the new sheds are now, and it was a wooden building off the ground a bit, probably a couple of feet off the ground, so it had a wooden floor in it, and rats and mice and possums and heaven knows what else used to get in under there, and they had nests everywhere under there, and the kids around the town used to get up there smoking and lighting matches and that, and we had a couple of small fires there that got put out. I was part of the fire brigade at the time, and I brought it up in a deacon's meeting that perhaps we should have a bit of a burn off up there one night. So our pastor at the time said, what a great idea, and Terry Perkins said, yeah, I'll come and help, and we said, all right. I said, I'll get the fire truck, I'll get permission to borrow the fire truck, and I'll bring it over and we'll have a burn off around the old Sunday school hall. Great idea. Anyway, the night it was organised, I was a bit iffy about doing it, so I rang the fire brigade captain, and he said, oh no, it should be all right. I said, oh, it's on a hill, and I said, it's a bit windy up there, and he said, no, it'll be right. And the pastor lit the match, and of course we had a nice little fire going around the old Sunday school hall, and I got the hose and keeping everything wet and making sure that nothing caught fire that was not supposed to catch fire. And we finished the burn off, and we stood there and looked and said, well, that's fantastic, it looked great, that should make it safe for the summer. I put the fire truck back, and Marlene was up at my grandmother's, which is in Welsh Street, the old double-storey bluestone house, where I was actually brought up for the first 10 years. That's where we lived. I go up there and I'm sitting in the kitchen and talking to me Nan, and Marlene was there, and me 2 kids and that, and the fire siren went, and I went, wonder why the fire siren's going. Being a fireman, I sort of said, well, I've got to go. I walked out the door and all I could see was flames coming from up near the town hall clock. And I said, that's the church. So I tore up there, and here's the Sunday school hall, well and truly on fire. Burnt it to the ground. So the investigation went on to see what caused it, and of course they said, well, Ron Muir lit it. He had the fire truck there and he lit it, which, as I said, I didn't actually light it, but I did have the fire truck there. What had happened is the wind that must have caught a few sparks went in underneath where all these rat nests and possum nests and that of just dead grass and all sorts of bits of rubbish. And of course, after we left it, a couple of hours after we left, it must have got under there and a little bit of wind, and it just kept, and finally, whew, off she went. That was the end of the Sunday school hall, which to me, I think God had a hand in it, because I really believe it was going to cost us a sweet fortune to do it up. It was really pretty run down. So that was that.
Some of the times that I look back on where I really think I saw God at work in our church were times when we were moving ahead together in some way in mission, in engagement in the community.
Would be about 10 years ago when Darring approached the church. They wanted to do some sort of Christmas toy shop, which was providing gifts to families for the children who couldn't normally buy it for themselves. And I know that my daughter and then the wife of one of our pastors took it on, because she worked for the health service, Cobalt. And they really didn't know what they were going to get into, but they started off what is still now running today, something new, which was recognised that not everyone in the community had the wherewithal, had the financial means. We did have to address those people who were struggling, and I think that's when the church, and Ryan was also the pastor, he was involved, they recognised that there was something that we could do with the support of other churches too, to actually show God's love to everyone in the community.
The churches have evolved as the community has evolved. Yes, when we arrived, you would say it was a Christian community. You wouldn't say that now, but I do believe that the impact that the church is having on the community is equal to what it was back then, because of the very organic nature of people living as God's people in the community. And that's not about linked to this church or that church. When every kid who, once upon a time when we arrived, every kid in the school knew about Jesus. They knew the story of the Bible, and they knew, well, kids don't know any of that stuff that days. And that's something I think we've grappled with as a community, as something we've grappled with as churches. How do we engage now with kids who have no idea what the Bible even is? That's the challenge for now and going forward. That wasn't the challenge back then. But I don't think there's any. They used to have children's missions and all those sorts of things before we arrived.
RE in the schools.
Never had that anymore. RE in schools was another
CRE.
one, or CRE as it then became known. But that doesn't happen anymore. So the massive challenge, it pushes the responsibility back onto us as individuals. It's not something that Kyneton Baptist Church is going to do in the future that's going to transform the community. It's the impact of individuals within the Kyneton Baptist Church is going to have the impact on the community. That's a big shift that's happened over the last 40, 50 years.
For what years I have left is probably what I've always done, is serve. I love helping people. I love to see people, I go and do something, I love to see them, that they're happy and that I've done something that's helped them.
For me, I think You know, God is about mission in the world, in our community. God's always at work. But our community is changing. Culture changes. So, you know, we are not the same as a community in 2020 as we were even in 2015. Things are changing, you know. We've seen that during this COVID season. You know, people are learning to use technology in ways that we haven't before. So things are always changing around us, and God is at work in the midst of that. And God's work is unchanging, but things around us change, and there are seasons. And so we have to be ready to let go of things that were once ordained by God for that time. And look at what God is doing in the current season in a new way, and be prepared to embrace that. But you know, my experience is that that's not easy, because we feel nervous whenever we go into something new. Is this going to work? You know, are we really hearing God clearly? And I think God loves it when we step out in faith and take a risk and are prepared to embrace something where we think God may be leading us in that direction. The people of God are a pilgrim people. We see that in the Bible, and moving from place to place with God. God leads us, and rarely do we see God just saying, "Stay put, don't change." You know, I think God is on the move, and we need to follow Him.
Don't lose sight of the impact of ordinary people. In our time, two of the most significant times of change and growth within the church was when we actually didn't have a pastor. When the church community said, "We don't have a pastor, but we're going to go on anyway." To me, that is the most important message that we can learn, and we actually need to learn that message. We so often rely on our pastor to do the job. The reality is it's our responsibility. And for me, probably the most important lesson is we actually don't need the pastor to do the job. It's great, it makes it easier, and it eases the burden on everybody, because we have someone who actually focuses their entire time on the task of reaching the community and engaging the community. But to me, the message for the future must always be the church is the people. If we did, in fact, I would say we would be better off without a building, but I won't say that. But the reality is that's where the power of the church lies. And boy, if there was ever a message, but we can't look back. We must always look forward, and I think that's something which we have always done. What's the challenge of today, and what's it going to be tomorrow? We have to keep thinking about that. If we fail to understand today the simple fact that we are God's representative here today in our community, if we don't recognise that, and if we don't build on that very simple fact, no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, the simple fact is God has put us in this community to be His people. We must be faithful to our community, we must be faithful to our God, and if we are that, if we are honest with ourselves and we are committed to serving God, we will be seen as a very, very powerful influence in the community.
I'm probably thinking along the similar lines to that, and this year has pointed out to me, probably more than any other time, is that Christians hold a whole range of views about everything. I have been coming back to is what binds Christians together. And if we can really value that and be sincere about the grace of God binding us together, that God really is not looking on any of us being different and what we hold opinions, but as long as we don't let those opinions alienate people. I've really got to work on that. So, you know, I think that's what, if we stick to that and just say what does draw us together, yes, we can be a bit diverse and be ourselves in some areas, but without hurting others.
I think the last 160 years of life of the Kyneton Baptist Church, which started down by the river still flows through the town the same way it did then. The water comes down, flows through, and then goes on. To me, there's a great analogy there for Kyneton Baptist Church. Our first members were baptised in that very river. We know the spot, we've been there in recent years. And I think to me that constant movement of the river is almost unchanging in the sense that it is still there. The constant movement of God's people in Kyneton will be here in another 160 years. It will be different, just like the river is very different now that it was 160 years ago. It will be here if we are faithful, if we nurture each other, if we nurture the church. I'm talking about the people. Then I think the church will be here, without doubt, influencing this community for another 160 years.
And for once, I agree with you.